Hello. Last weekend I went down to Stonehenge and to Avebury to visit the ancient stone circles with a group of friends, fellow druids, and had an absolutely lovely time. Weather aside, because it rained and rained and rained. But that to one side, I thought I would tell a story involving stone circles. There are many, many stories and legends and myths and so on about different stone circles from around the world, and certain themes crop up again and again, and this particular theme is one of them. Many hundreds of years ago, two wandering labourers were off travelling the country in search of work. They would go from farm to farm to farm, offering their services for a few days here and a few days there, and in exchange they would receive board and bed and lodging and food, and sometimes new boots or a new coat as the farmer was capable of giving them, and of course down to the level of work they'd offered. These two men came to a particularly lonely farm deep in the winter, at a time when most other travellers had given up travelling. Most of them had settled down with friends or family or whoever they could find to spend time with. But these two particular men had no one in their lives to spend time with, so they kept travelling all through the winter, even as the snows were falling. And it was Christmas Eve. And they came to one particular farm, and they knocked on the farmer's door, and the farmer's wife welcomed them in and gave them food and water, and they offered their services to repair and look after animals and do whatever task needed doing around the farm in exchange for somewhere warm and dry and some food over the Christmas period. And the farmer's wife said, "Well, I wasn't expecting labourers at this time of year. My sons are here, my daughter-in-laws are here, their children are here, everyone has gathered in, all of the rooms in the farmhouse are filled. The only place there is for you to stay, even though there isn't much work that needs doing, but I couldn't possibly at this time of year turn two travellers out back into the snows to keep wandering. The only place for you to stay is in the barn with the animals, with the cows and the donkeys, with the sheep, with the ducks. That's all I can offer you, the only dry place in the house." And the two men thought about this for a matter of seconds and said, "Fine, that will be warm, will be dry. We're used to the smells of the farm, so we'll put up with that in exchange for a good meal, and we'll do whatever little jobs around the place need doing." And so the farmer's wife took them out to the barn and made them as comfortable as she could and brought them something to eat for the evening. And she went back in, and the two men were left there with nothing but the company of the donkeys and the sheep and the cattle and the goats and the ducks and so on. And they drank the beer that they'd been given, and they ate the bread and the cheese and a little bit of meat, and they started to doze off, when a voice came to them. "It's very cold." And the two men looked up and wondered who had come into the barn. They couldn't see anyone, so they looked at each other curiously and went back to sleep. Well, we must have imagined it, and started to doze off again. And another voice said, "Very cold, I've never known a Christmas like it, have you?" And another voice came and said, "Oh, no, this has to be the coldest Christmas in 10 years I've been on this farm, and I've never known a Christmas as cold as this, and the snows are so high." And the two men looked at each other again, and they popped their heads up over the great bale of straw behind which they were sleeping. And they watched, but there was no other humans in the barn, just the animals. But as they watched, they could hear the voices and see them coming from the lips of the donkeys and the goats and the sheep and the cattle and the ducks. The animals were talking to each other. Now, these were two country lads. They had been born and raised in the country. They knew all of the myths and legends of the country, told them by their late grandmothers. And they knew the stories that on Christmas Eve, once the midnight hour has struck, animals, for a brief space of time until the dawn rises, are restored to them the power of speech. No longer must they bleat and moo and quack and make all of the usual noises they make. They gain the power of human speech, something they had once in the ancient distant past. And the story of how they lost it, well, that's a whole other story for a whole other time. But these two men, of course, they'd never actually believed a word that their grandmothers had said upon this. I don't know who ever does. They just stared at each other. It's actually true. And the two men whispering to each other, we should keep very quiet, because you never know what they might say next. If they realise we're listening to them, maybe they'll get aggressive, maybe they'll get angry. And who knows what interesting things we might hear if we keep stum. And interesting things they did hear indeed. For the donkey, some half an hour later, turned and said to the goat, "Do you think the stones will move again this year?" "Oh, they will," said the goat. "Every single year, without fail. Once the Christmas Eve midnight hour has passed, as it has passed, the stones will roll down to the river to drink deep, the one time of year they can drink deep. And you know what they say about the contents of the holes that the stones leave behind them." "What do they say?" asked one of the ducks. "Well, they say that the ancient treasures, that the old ones, the wise ones, the people who built those massive stones in the first place, left behind them, they buried beneath the stones as offerings to the old gods and the old ways." And at this, the two men's ears pricked up, and, well, any thought of discretion was gone from them. And much to the consternation of the goats and the ducks and the sheep and so on, the two men raced out of the barn, raced out into the night in search of the stone circles. Now, they'd passed, in the distance, a particularly large stone circle, and they assumed this is what the goat and the donkey and all the rest of the animals were talking about, and they raced through the darkness, lit only by the power of the moon, and they came to where, theoretically, the stone circle ought to be. Except, just as the donkey and the goat had said, it wasn't there. It was the hill. They recognised the hill. They recognised that clump of trees. They recognised the fence that the farmer had put up around the base of the hill. This was the hill that they had seen that stone circle standing upon in their travels up to the farm, but no stones. And they looked in the distance where they knew the river took its course, and they could see great shadows moving, lumbering around where the river lay. Is it true? And one of them, more curious of the two, snuck down as quietly as he could until he was within easy seeing distance, and there, leaning into the river, were 24 huge, enormous stones, even bigger out of the ground than they had looked when they were stuck in the ground. And he could hear slurping and slobbering as the stones were drinking deeply of the cold, fresh water of the river. And he raced back up the hill to tell his friend. But the friend was initially nowhere to be seen, until a voice came from one of the dark patches in the ground, one of the holes where one of the stones stood. And the young labourer went up to where his friend was, in the hole, and he said, "Look down here, there's jewels and coins, there's necklaces, there's pendants, there's swords, there's all manner of things. Go and fetch a light from the barn. Go and fetch a sack, and we'll fill as much as we can. We will live like kings." And the young man at the top said, "That's stealing. I mean, you hear all these stories about the old ones, the people who put up these stone circles. They're new magic. They might curse us if they know we have stolen their goods, their property." Rubbish, said the other man, the taller man. "Go and get to the barn, get a lantern, get a sack, some old potato sack from one of the farmers, bring it back, and we'll take our fill." Well, after a bit more shouting, the younger man went off into the barn, and there were the animals glaring at him, saying, "Oh, what are you up to? We know what you're doing. You've got up to that stone circle. We no good have come of it," said one of the ducks. And the young man, by now, well, scared half out of his wits, scared of the curse of the ancients on him, scared of talking ducks, giving him warnings, nonetheless did as his friend had told him. He went and got a sack, emptied out all of the vegetables, he got himself a lantern, and back up to the hill he went. "You took your time," said the other man in the hole. "Pass that sack down." And he began to fill the sack with all of the jewels and the gold and the ornamentation that was placed at the bottom of this very, very deep shaft. And he passed it up to the young man at the top, who stood there shaking and holding it. What do we next? "We'll go in the next hole, and we'll empty the next hole. There's well over a dozen holes here, every single one of them filled with gold and with silver and with rubies and with emeralds and who knows what else. Well, the taller man bullied the younger one, and they went into the next hole, and he started to fill the sack up. When the younger one said, I can hear rumbling, there's something coming. Rubbish, we'll go as fast as we can. It's probably just the farmer coming to see if we're all right. And he stashed full the sack, and he passed the sack up to the younger man at the top. And the younger man took it and stood there shaking. It was a heavy, heavy sack, but he was shaking like a leaf in the cold, and watching over his shoulder, and there, rolling up the hill, were those 24 enormous, hugely heavy standing stones. And there the young man said, they're coming. And the man at the bottom of the pit said, get another sack as quick as you can, race down to the barn, get another sack. I'll have the sack you've got, you can have the next sack we fill. We'll live like emperors, not just kings, emperors. Well, the younger man panicked, said, I want none of it, and threw the sack down into the bottom of the pit and tore off, leaving the lantern up by the surface of the hole. Well, the older man, the taller man who was down in the bottom of the pit, he scrabbled to get out, but without the younger man to pull him up, there he could but stay, and the rumbling sound got closer and closer and closer, and the younger man, who by now was leaping over the fence at the bottom of the hill, heard the screaming and the crunching and the splattering as the enormous boulder, the enormous standing menhir stone, slotted itself back into place. His friend and companion still in the hole, squelched flat. Well, the young man didn't stay around to hear any more advice and admonition from the ducks or the goats or the donkeys. He was off into the night, and of course he lived long enough to get to the next farm and tell his story, for otherwise I would not have found it out now and not been able to tell it to you.